"Ma'am, we have a warrant to remove your child from the home." The words came from a uniformed officer standing in my kitchen doorway, a social worker beside him holding a tablet. My 2-year-old son Grayson was playing with wooden blocks on the living room floor, completely oblivious to the 3 strangers who just invaded our home. My hands were covered in flour from making his favorite cookies, and I stood frozen, trying to process what was happening. "There's been a report of severe neglect," the social worker continued, her voice professional but not unkind. "We have video evidence that requires immediate intervention." Video evidence? I opened my mouth to ask what they were talking about, but then I saw him. My husband stood in the hallway behind the officers, his face pale but his expression unreadable. He wasn't asking questions. He wasn't defending me. He was just standing there, silent. Then I heard footsteps on the porch, and my mother-in-law Connie appeared in the doorway, her face arranged in exaggerated concern but her eyes gleaming with something that looked disturbingly like triumph. She was smiling. Actually smiling. "You can't take my baby," I screamed as they moved toward the living room. That look on her face, that barely concealed satisfaction in her eyes, I knew in that instant this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. The social worker was talking to Grayson in that gentle voice professionals use with scared children. My son looked at me, confused, reaching his little arms out. "Mama?" I tried to move toward him, but the officer stepped between us. "Ma'am, please step back. We need to complete the removal." Through the fog of panic, I watched Connie place her hand on my husband's arm, a gesture of comfort that made my stomach turn. She'd orchestrated this. Somehow, she'd orchestrated this entire nightmare, and my husband had let her. They drove away with my baby in a car seat I'd never seen before, clearly prepared for this moment. I dropped to my knees in the kitchen, flour still dusting my hands, cookies burning in the oven. The house felt impossibly empty without Grayson's laughter. That's when the title card might as well have appeared before my eyes. "This is how they tried to destroy me." My name is Allison, and 6 months ago, I was living what I thought was a normal life in a small town outside Pittsburgh. I'd been a paralegal for 7 years before Grayson was born, working at a family law firm that specialized in custody cases. The irony of that wasn't lost on me now. I'd left that job to be a stay-at-home mom, believing it was what was best for our son. My husband worked in sales, traveling frequently, which meant I handled most of the parenting alone. My mother-in-law Connie had always been what I'd politely called intense. She had opinions about everything, from how I dressed Grayson to what temperature I kept the house. But I'd written it off as typical grandparent behavior, the kind of boundary pushing that most families dealt with. I was wrong. The real problem started the day Grayson was born. Connie had been in the delivery room, despite my protests, because my husband insisted she had a right to be there. She tried to hold Grayson before I did, actually argued with the nurse about it. That should have been my first warning sign. But I'd been exhausted, overwhelmed, and trying to be the accommodating daughter-in-law everyone expected me to be. The first truly disturbing incident happened when Grayson was 3 months old. I'd stopped by Connie's house to pick up a casserole dish I'd lent her, and I overheard her talking to her church friends in the kitchen. "This is Lucas," she was saying, and I realized she was showing them photos of Grayson on her phone. Such a handsome boy. I always hated that name Grayson. Doesn't suit him at all. Lucas is much more distinguished. I stood in the hallway, frozen with disbelief. She was literally renaming my child to her friends, speaking about him as if I didn't exist, as if she had some kind of authority over what he was called. When I confronted her about it later, she laughed it off. "Oh honey, I was just joking around. You're so sensitive." But there'd been no humor in her voice when she said it. She'd meant every word. When I told my husband about it that night, he sighed like I was being unreasonable. "It's just a nickname, babe. My mom calls him lots of things. It doesn't mean anything." But it did mean something. It meant Connie saw Grayson as hers, not mine. It meant she didn't recognize my authority as his mother. Looking back, that was the moment I should have drawn a hard line. The baby monitor incident happened 2 months later. I'd come home from a grocery run to find Connie in my bedroom, going through my dresser drawers. "I was looking for wipes," she'd said when I walked in, her voice casual as if it was completely normal to search through someone's bedroom. "I thought you kept them up here." We kept the wipes in the nursery, as she knew perfectly well. That night, I was checking the baby monitor app on my phone, the one connected to the camera in Grayson's room. The viewing history showed activity long after Connie had left that afternoon. Someone had accessed the feed and watched for 3 hours after her visit ended. When I looked closer at the camera angle, I realized it had been moved slightly, pointed more toward the hallway than the crib. I showed my husband the logs, the proof that someone had been watching us remotely. "I probably accidentally turned it on when I was checking on him earlier," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You know how glitchy that app can be." But the app wasn't glitchy. Someone had been watching us. And now I knew my husband was lying about it, which meant he either didn't believe me or he was part of whatever was happening. The hidden camera changed everything. I was cleaning the nursery on a Tuesday morning, organizing Grayson's books, when I noticed a small blinking red light under the bookshelf. I got down on my hands and knees and found a tiny camera, the kind you could buy online for home security, tucked behind some board books. It was pointed directly at the rocking chair where I nursed Grayson. My hands shook as I pulled it out, my mind racing through the implications. Someone had hidden a camera in my baby's room without my knowledge or consent. When I confronted my husband that evening, holding the camera in my palm, he barely reacted. "Oh, I put that there," he said, like it was no big deal. "Just in case. You've been so tired lately, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay when I was traveling." The excuse was so flimsy it was insulting. Why would he hide it? Why not tell me about it? Why point it at the nursing chair instead of the crib? The line wasn't just crossed anymore. It was obliterated. I was being watched, monitored, documented in my own home, and my husband thought I was too stupid to realize what was really happening. I started noticing the pattern everywhere once I knew what to look for. Connie had somehow gotten a duplicate key to our house, letting herself in whenever she wanted. She'd show up when my husband was traveling, acting like she had every right to be there. Grayson had a mild dairy allergy, nothing life-threatening but enough that we avoided milk products. I'd explained this to Connie multiple times, written it down, even had the pediatrician tell her directly. She fed him ice cream anyway, claiming she forgot, as I dealt with his upset stomach and discomfort. She scheduled pediatrician appointments without telling me, showing up with Grayson as if she was his parent. The receptionist actually called me once, confused about why there were 2 adults claiming to be the primary guardian. My voice broke when I tried to explain to my husband how violated I felt. "I'm starting to feel like the outsider in my own family," I told him. "Like I'm just the surrogate who carried Grayson, and now you and your mother are the real parents." He told me I was being dramatic. That I was tired and emotional and not thinking clearly. The gaslighting was constant, designed to make me question my own perceptions and sanity. The phrase slipped out during a family dinner at Connie's house. We were eating her pot roast, everyone making polite conversation, when Connie started talking about preschool options for Grayson. "When I get custody, I think the Montessori school would be best," she said casually, reaching for the butter. The room went silent. I stared at her, fork halfway to my mouth. "What did you just say?" Connie blinked, her face rearranging into confused innocence. "Oh, I meant when I get to watch him more regularly. Custody of my time with him, you know." It was just a slip of the tongue. But I'd seen it. Just for a second before she'd corrected herself, there'd been a flash of something cold and calculating in her eyes. She'd meant exactly what she said. That night, I installed my own security camera system throughout the house. Professional grade, cloud backup, motion-activated recording, the works. I didn't tell my husband about it. I mounted them in places that looked like regular home security but captured every angle of our main living spaces. If something was being planned, if I was being set up in some way, I needed documentation that they didn't know about. I needed to protect myself and my son. The first CPS call came 2 weeks later. "A welfare check," they said, responding to a report that I'd left Grayson alone in the bathtub. I proved I'd never done that, showed them my routine, even had the pediatrician confirm Grayson showed no signs of neglect. But the accusation shook me deeply. Someone had called in a completely false report, specific enough to trigger an investigation but vague enough that it couldn't be easily disproven. The CPS worker was kind but thorough, explaining that they had to follow up on every report regardless of how credible it seemed. After she left, I sat at my kitchen table and started writing everything down. Every boundary violation, every strange incident, every time Connie had shown up unannounced or made comments about Grayson being hers. The pattern was unmistakable. Someone was documenting moments, collecting out-of-context evidence, building a case against me. And I had a pretty good idea who. I started keeping a journal, time-stamped and detailed, of every interaction with Connie and my husband. If they were collecting evidence against me, I needed to collect evidence of what they were really doing. The custody binder was hidden under the guest bed, the room Connie stayed in during her frequent overnight visits. I'd been changing the sheets when I saw the corner of a blue folder peeking out from under the bed frame. I pulled it out and opened it, my hand starting to shake as I realized what I was looking at. It was a comprehensive case file against me. Timestamps of when Grayson cried for more than 10 minutes, completely ignoring the fact that I always responded and soothed him. Screenshots of me drinking a glass of wine while holding Grayson, cropped to remove context that it was during a family dinner where everyone was drinking. Photos taken through our windows of me letting Grayson play independently in the fenced backyard, captioned as "left outside alone." Notes about my concerning behavior, which included things like refuses to follow my parenting advice and becomes defensive when I try to help. Every normal parenting moment had been twisted, documented, and filed as evidence of my supposed unfitness as a mother. My mother-in-law had been building a custody case against me, collecting twisted evidence for what looked like months. I photographed every page with my phone before carefully putting the binder back exactly where I'd found it. I showed the binder photos to my husband that evening, my voice shaking with rage and betrayal. "Your mother has been documenting everything I do with Grayson. She's building some kind of case against me. Do you see this? Do you understand what this means?" He looked at the photos on my phone, his expression barely changing. Then he handed my phone back with a sigh. "You're being hysterical, Allison. It's just grandma's stuff. She probably wants to have memories and notes about Grayson's development. You're reading way too much into it." Hysterical. That word, weaponized against women for centuries to dismiss legitimate concerns and genuine fear. "These aren't memories," I said slowly, trying to keep my voice level. "These are accusations. These are twisted versions of normal parenting presented as evidence of neglect." He shook his head, that familiar condescending expression on his face. "My mother loves Grayson. She's trying to be helpful. If you weren't so paranoid, you'd see that." That's when I knew for certain. He wasn't just being manipulated by Connie. He was actively helping her. This wasn't a case of a man caught between his mother and his wife. This was a conspiracy, and I was the target. I set my own trap 3 nights later. I pretended to take my usual sleeping medication, which my husband always insisted I needed for my anxiety. Instead, I hid the pill under my tongue and spit it out once he was asleep. Then I lay in bed, breathing deeply and evenly, pretending to be unconscious. Around 2 a.m., I heard the guest room door creak open. Through barely slitted eyes, I watched Connie creep down the hallway toward Grayson's room. She moved confidently, like someone who'd done this before, like someone who knew exactly where the floorboards wouldn't creak. I heard her open Grayson's door, heard my baby make a small sound of confusion. Then I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I waited 5 more minutes before silently getting up and positioning myself where I could see the kitchen but remain hidden. Connie had taken Grayson out of his crib and was staging a scene. She'd opened a bottle of wine, poured it into a glass I recognized as one I'd used earlier that day. She'd opened the medicine cabinet and scattered pills on the counter. Then she took out her phone and started photographing the scene, making sure to capture Grayson looking confused and sleepy in his pajamas. My security cameras were recording everything. The next morning, I sent the footage to Melanie, an old coworker from my paralegal days who'd gone on to become a family law attorney. She called me back within an hour, her voice tight with professional anger. "Allison, this is evidence tampering. This is staging false evidence of child endangerment. This isn't just unethical, it's criminal." She talked me through what I needed to do. Don't let them know you have this footage. Don't confront them. Keep playing along like you don't suspect anything. Let them keep building their fake case, because every false piece of evidence they create, every staged photograph, every manipulated video, it all becomes evidence of their malicious intent. Mel explained that in custody cases, proving the other party had fabricated evidence was one of the most damaging things you could demonstrate. It showed consciousness of guilt, it showed deliberate malice, and it completely destroyed their credibility. But you need to be patient, she warned. You need to let them feel confident enough to actually file something official. That's when we strike. So I waited. I smiled at Connie during her visits. I didn't change my routine. I let them think their plan was working perfectly. 3 weeks later, they made their move. The fake evidence was compiled and submitted to CPS, a collection of edited video clips and manipulated photographs that made me look like a neglectful, possibly dangerous mother. Clips of Grayson crying were edited to remove my responses, making it look like I ignored him. Photos were cropped and filtered to suggest squalor that didn't exist. The medication scene Connie had staged was presented as evidence I was abusing pills while caring for my son. CPS opened an official investigation, which triggered the scene that had started this nightmare. The officers, the warrant, Grayson being removed from my home. Mel had warned me this would happen, had told me not to fight back immediately, but knowing it was coming didn't make it any easier. Watching them drive away with my baby in the car while Connie stood on my porch with that satisfied smile nearly broke me. But I remembered what Mel had said, let them incriminate themselves completely. Every minute they kept Grayson based on false evidence was another minute they'd have to answer for later. I just had to be strong enough to wait for justice. The emergency custody hearing was scheduled for 72 hours later. I sat in the courtroom wearing a conservative dress, my hair pulled back, looking every inch the responsible mother I actually was. Connie sat behind my husband, occasionally dabbing at her eyes with a tissue as if she was heartbroken by this whole situation. The judge, a woman named Patricia Oakes with steel gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the evidence packet CPS had submitted. I watched her face carefully as she clicked through the photos and video clips. Her expression was skeptical but intrigued, like she'd seen this kind of case before and something wasn't adding up. Mel stood when it was our turn to present. Your Honor, my client respectfully requests a 72-hour delay before any permanent custody decisions are made. We have additional evidence that directly contradicts the material submitted by the petitioners, but we need time to compile it properly for court review. Judge Oakes looked at me, then at Connie and my husband. Why wasn't this evidence available today? Because we only recently obtained some of it, and we want to ensure everything is properly authenticated and presented according to court standards. The judge granted the delay. Connie looked smug, probably thinking we were stalling because we had nothing. My husband avoided looking at me entirely. The crack in their story appeared at a follow-up CPS meeting before the next hearing. The social worker asked Connie to clarify some inconsistencies in the timeline of the photographs she'd submitted. Connie became defensive, her voice rising as she insisted she was just trying to protect her grandbaby. Then she said something that made the social worker pause mid-note. Look, I enhanced some of the clips just to make a point. The rooms weren't actually that messy, but I wanted you to see the overall pattern of neglect. Sometimes you have to adjust things to make people understand the bigger picture. The social worker's pen stopped moving. You enhanced the evidence? I mean, I just edited it to show what was really happening, Connie backtracked, realizing her mistake. Nothing major. Just making sure the truth came through clearly. The social worker maintained her professional expression, but she made several detailed notes. Mel caught my eye across the room and gave the tiniest nod. Connie had just admitted to evidence tampering on record, and she didn't even realize how badly she'd just damaged her own case. I stayed quiet, letting her dig the hole deeper with every word. The beta launch happened on a Tuesday morning. VineX announced FlowStream, our new platform. Cleaner interface. Faster processing. Better security. And 30% cheaper than TechFlow's premium tier. The tech blogs picked it up immediately. VineX's surprise comeback, and has TechFlow finally met its match? The comparisons were brutal and immediate. Everything TechFlow did, FlowStream did better. And none of it was stolen. It was just superior engineering. Built from scratch using everything I'd learned from 5 years of mistakes and victories. Charles had given me full creative control, and I delivered something I was genuinely proud of. Client inquiries flooded in within hours. Companies that had been considering TechFlow suddenly had a better option. Companies already using TechFlow started asking about migration paths. I'd monitored TechFlow's emergency meetings through Vanessa. Logan had been panicking, screaming at his remaining engineers to figure out how they did it, demanding they copy features from FlowStream. It's chaos, Vanessa had reported. He's melting down. 2 weeks later, Logan did exactly what I'd predicted. He reached out to Charles about a potential partnership. About maybe working together instead of competing. Charles had called me immediately. He wants to meet. What do you want me to do? I'd smiled. Tell him you'll think about it. Schedule a meeting for next month. And let's prepare the buyout terms. Because Logan's board was losing faith. And we were about to give them a solution. Charles had played his role perfectly. The meeting with Logan had been cordial, professional. Logan had pitched collaboration. Charles had listened thoughtfully. Your technology is impressive, Charles had said, which was true. Because I'd built it. But I'm concerned about your company's direction. Logan had tried to spin the narrative. Talked about growth opportunities and market positioning. But Charles had been blunt. Your investors are nervous. Your client retention is dropping. Your team morale is low. These are serious problems. We're addressing them, Logan had insisted. Charles had leaned forward. Then let me help you address them. I'm prepared to offer a full acquisition. Fair terms. Your team keeps their jobs. Your investors get their returns. Logan's face had gone pale. You want to buy TechFlow? I want to save it, Charles had corrected. Before you run it completely into the ground. Logan had left that meeting shaken. Over the next week, 3 of his 5 board members reached out to Charles privately. They'd seen the numbers. They knew TechFlow was struggling. And they wanted out before things got worse. Charles had made his formal offer on a Thursday. Full acquisition at slightly below market value, with the caveat that Logan would step down as CEO immediately. The board has lost confidence in your leadership, Charles had explained during the call. This is the best deal you're going to get. Logan had tried to fight. Had threatened lawsuits and investigations. But his own investors had turned on him. They wanted the deal. They wanted their money. And they wanted Logan gone. The acquisition was announced 3 weeks later. Press releases went out. TechFlow would become part of the Vianex family. Current employees would be retained. Leadership would transition. Logan would step down effective immediately. The board meeting to finalize everything was scheduled for Monday morning. I'd driven to the office early, my heart pounding with anticipation. Charles had texted me. Ready? Ready, I'd replied. When Logan walked into the conference room, he'd been expecting the board. His lawyers. Maybe some Vianex executives he'd never met. Instead, he saw me. Sitting across the table. Wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for this moment. Next to Charles, who was smiling. His face had gone white. What is this? Logan had stammered. Hello, Logan, I'd said calmly. Long time no see. He'd looked around the room wildly. At his board members, who wouldn't meet his eyes. At Charles, who was organizing papers. At me, the person he'd thrown away. You're kidding me, he'd whispered. You? You're behind this? I'd smiled. The same smile I'd given him the day he'd fired me. Didn't see that coming, did you? Charles had gestured to the empty chair. Sit down, Logan. Let's walk through the transition plan. Step by step. Logan had tried everything. Threats. Appeals to old friendship. Legal challenges. But every door was already closed. His lawyers had reviewed the acquisition terms and confirmed everything was legal. His investors had already signed off. His board had voted to remove him. "This is theft," Logan had hissed, leaning across the table. "I built this company." "No," I'd corrected calmly. "I built this company. You just took credit for it." He'd tried to invoke his exit package. The golden parachute he'd negotiated years ago. Millions of dollars for stepping down. But Vanessa had provided documentation of his financial fraud. The falsified metrics. The inflated projections. The lies he'd told to keep investors happy. Section 7.3, Charles had said, sliding papers across the table. Any exit compensation is void if the departing executive is found to have committed fraud or material misrepresentation. Logan's face had crumbled. "You can't prove that." "Actually," Vanessa had said, walking into the conference room with a box of documents, "I can." She'd placed the box in front of the board. 3 years of falsified reports. Emails showing deliberate deception. Even recordings of Logan instructing me to manipulate numbers. Logan had stared at her like she'd stabbed him. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I was," Vanessa had said. "Until I realized you were going to drag me down with you." The vote was unanimous. Logan would leave with nothing. Not even a LinkedIn recommendation. He'd walked out of that boardroom a broken man. And I'd felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Walking through the TechFlow office as its new chief innovation officer felt surreal. The space looked the same. Same desks, same conference rooms, same coffee machine that never worked properly. But everything had changed. I'd spent the first week meeting with remaining employees. Some were wary. I'd been gone for 2 years. Some were relieved. They'd heard I was taking over. A few had already quit when they'd heard Logan was out. They were the ones who'd laughed when he'd humiliated me. I didn't try to convince them to stay. I brought back the people who mattered. The 12 who'd committed to working with me again. Engineers who understood the code base. Designers who knew the product vision. Team members who'd been there from the beginning. "Welcome home," I'd told them as they walked back into the office. "Let's fix this place." We'd worked systematically. Addressed the technical debt Logan had ignored. Fixed the architectural problems I'd warned about years ago. Rebuilt relationships with clients who'd been frustrated by poor service. Within 3 months, the culture had transformed. People started smiling again. Innovation happened naturally. The product improved in ways that actually mattered. Then I'd heard through the industry grapevine that Logan was trying to start something new. Trying to raise venture funding for a revolutionary new platform. I'd smiled when Charles had told me. "Let him try," I'd said. Charles had handled it quietly. No public announcements. No dramatic confrontations. Just a few strategic conversations with the right people. Investors Logan was pitching to would get a call. "Just thought you should know about some concerns regarding his previous venture." Board members at firms considering partnerships would receive friendly warnings. "Might want to do thorough due diligence on this one." Word spread through the startup ecosystem the way it always does. Whispers and warnings. Red flags and cautionary tales. Logan found himself shut out of meetings. Disinvited from pitch competitions. Removed from consideration for accelerator programs. It wasn't a dramatic blacklist. It was something more subtle and more devastating. His reputation had simply evaporated. The man who'd once been celebrated as a visionary founder was now seen as someone who couldn't be trusted. Someone who'd committed fraud. Someone who destroyed his own company through arrogance and incompetence. "He's consulting now," Vanessa had mentioned during a project meeting. Advising early-stage startups on growth strategy. The irony was perfect. Logan, who'd driven TechFlow into the ground, was giving other people advice on how to succeed. "Think he learned anything?" I'd asked. Vanessa had laughed. "People like Logan never learn. They just find new victims." I'd decided then that I was done thinking about him. Logan had taken up enough space in my head. It was time to focus on building something better instead of dwelling on what he destroyed. A tech journalist had requested an interview about Vinex's acquisition and turnaround of TechFlow. I'd almost declined. I didn't want to rehash the story publicly. But Charles had convinced me. People need to hear this. Not as revenge, but as a case study in resilience. So I'd agreed. We'd met at a coffee shop, and the journalist, a woman named Taylor, had been direct. There's been speculation about the circumstances of your departure from TechFlow, she'd said. And your role in the acquisition. Can you address that? I'd chosen my words carefully. I was a co-founder who got pushed out. It happens more often than people think. The difference is what you do afterward. Which was? Build something better. Prove that the original success wasn't about one person's charisma. It was about real innovation and solid engineering. She'd asked about Logan specifically. What I thought of his leadership. What had gone wrong. Some people mistake ego for leadership, I'd said. They believe their own press and forget that companies are built by teams, not individuals. The article had published 2 weeks later. TechFlow's Phoenix, how one engineer reclaimed her company, had gone viral. Shared across LinkedIn. Discussed in startup forums. Analyzed in business school case studies. The comments section had been brutal toward Logan. People who'd worked with him shared their own stories. His reputation, already damaged, was completely shredded. I'd read through some of the comments but stopped halfway. This wasn't about destroying Logan. It was about rebuilding what he'd nearly destroyed. 2 years after Logan had fired me, an envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Logan's. Inside was a single card. One sentence written in his distinctive scrawl. Was it worth it? I'd stared at that card for a long time. Was it worth it? Worth the 2 years of grinding work, rebuilding from nothing, proving myself all over again? Worth the stress and the doubt and the nights when I'd wondered if I was delusional to think I could win? Worth the relationships that had been damaged and the trust that had been broken? I'd thought about the company we'd built together. The dreams we'd shared in that cramped apartment. The moment when everything had felt possible and pure. Then I'd thought about what I'd learned. That partnerships require mutual respect, not just shared goals. That building something meaningful takes more than charisma and vision. That when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. I'd walked to the shredder in the corner of my office. Fed Logan's card through the machine. Watched it turn into confetti. Then I'd sat back down at my desk and returned to work. Building. Creating. Leading. The way I should have been allowed to do from the beginning. No, I hadn't replied to Logan's question. Because he wouldn't have understood the answer anyway. Flowstream continued to grow. Within 18 months of the acquisition, we'd doubled TechFlow's previous user base. Expanded into markets Logan had never thought to pursue. Built features that solved real problems instead of chasing trends. I'd promoted 3 people from within to senior leadership positions. People who'd been overlooked under Logan's regime because they'd been doers instead of talkers. The culture I'd worked so hard to create in the early days had returned. Stronger now. More mature. My team started winning industry awards. Recognition for innovation, for workplace culture, for technical excellence. Each one felt like vindication. Not because I needed to prove anything to Logan anymore, but because I needed to prove it to myself. That I'd been right. That the company I'd envisioned was possible. That leadership wasn't about ego or control but about empowering talented people to do their best work. Charles had been invaluable. Not as a boss, but as a mentor. He'd given me autonomy while offering guidance when I'd needed it. You know what the best part of this whole story is? He'd asked during a quarterly review meeting. What? You didn't win because you were angry. You won because you were better. That had stayed with me. Because it was true. I hadn't destroyed Logan through sabotage or revenge. I'd simply built something superior and let the market decide. I ran into someone from Logan's new venture at a tech conference. A young developer who'd joined his consulting firm, starry-eyed and eager. You used to work with Logan, right? She'd asked when she'd recognized me. How was he as a leader? I'd considered my answer carefully. I could have told her everything. About the betrayal and the fraud and the systematic destruction of everything good. But she'd find out on her own soon enough. People like Logan always revealed themselves eventually. He's very good at selling a vision, I'd said. Just make sure you protect yourself legally. Read every contract. Keep documentation of everything. She'd looked confused. That seems overly cautious. Maybe, I'd agreed. But I'd rather be cautious than regretful. She'd thanked me and walked away, and I'd wondered if she'd remember that conversation later. If she'd wish she'd listened more carefully. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent 2 years fighting to reclaim what was mine. Now it was time to focus on building something new. Something that would outlast any one person's ego or ambition. The conference keynote that afternoon had been about legacy. About what we leave behind in the tech industry. I'd listened from the back of the auditorium and thought about my own legacy. Not the company I'd built or the revenge I'd gotten. But the people I'd helped. The culture I'd created. The standard I'd set for how leaders should treat the people who trust them. 3 years after everything had fallen apart, TechFlow was unrecognizable from the company Logan had nearly destroyed. We'd expanded to 5 cities. Hired 300 people. Developed 3 new product lines that were changing how businesses operated. And through it all, I'd made sure everyone knew the truth. That companies are built by teams, not individuals. That innovation comes from collaboration, not control. That real leadership means empowering others, not diminishing them. I'd been invited to speak at a startup founder conference. The topic was building sustainable companies. I'd almost declined, still uncomfortable with public speaking. But something had made me accept. Standing on that stage, looking at hundreds of young founders with their dreams and their naivety, I'd felt a responsibility to tell them the truth. Most advice you'll get will be about growth hacking and fundraising and pitch decks, I'd begun. But I want to talk about something more important. How to treat your co-founders and early employees. I'd shared my story. Not as a revenge tale, but as a cautionary one. About the importance of legal protection. About reading every document. About trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. The person who seems like your perfect partner might be planning to push you out, I'd said. Protect yourself legally. But also protect yourself emotionally. Don't let anyone make you question your own value. The standing ovation afterward had lasted 3 minutes. And the messages that had poured in over the following weeks had all said the same thing. Thank you for telling the truth. I kept one photo from the early days on my desk. Not prominently displayed, but tucked in a drawer I'd open occasionally. Me and Logan in that cramped apartment, grinning at the camera, the first working prototype glowing on the laptop screen between us. I'd look at it sometimes and try to remember what I'd felt in that moment. The pure excitement. The genuine partnership. The belief that we were building something together. That version of Logan might have been real once. Before the success and the ego and the hunger for control had corrupted something that could have been great. Or maybe that version had never existed. Maybe I'd just been seeing what I'd wanted to see. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I'd built afterward. A company where people felt valued. Where innovation came from collaboration. Where success was measured not just in profits but in the lives we'd improved and the standards we'd set. Logan had pushed me out of the company I'd helped build. And in doing so, he'd given me the greatest gift possible. The chance to prove I didn't need him. That the talent and the vision and the drive had been mine all along. He'd thought he was taking everything from me. Instead, he'd freed me to become everything I was meant to be. The loudest revenge isn't a call-out post or a public confrontation. It's building something better. It's succeeding so completely that the person who tried to destroy you becomes irrelevant. It's proving that your value wasn't dependent on their validation. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight. It's to simply outlast, outwork, and outbuild the person who underestimated you. I closed the drawer with the old photo and returned to my computer. There were products to launch. Teams to lead. A legacy to build. Logan was somewhere in the past, still trying to figure out what had gone wrong. I was in the present, building the future. And that made all the difference.